Smoke turned the sky over Spokane orange in a matter of hours on Saturday afternoon, and by the time the sun came up Sunday morning, more than 600 homes and buildings were gone. Not damaged, gone, burned to their foundations while families grabbed what they could carry and ran. This is Washington's second largest city, not a remote forest community, an actual city of over 200,000 people, and right now, tens of thousands of its residents don't know if they still have a home to go back to. Let's break down exactly what happened in Spokane over the last 48 hours. How a grass fire on the edge of town turned into one of the most destructive urban wildfire disasters in state history, why it's part of a much bigger pattern this state has been living through all year, and what's still unfolding on the ground right now. If you want updates as this situation develops, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this fire is still burning and still growing. A thumbs up helps this information reach people who need it. Here's exactly what we know. It started just after noon on Saturday, August 1st. A fire ignited in dry brush and grass west of Spokane, an area that authorities would soon name the Old Trails Fire. At that point, it looked like any other grass fire that crews deal with dozens of times a summer in eastern Washington. It did not stay that way for long. Fed by extreme fire weather, the National Weather Service had already warned the region was facing what officials called an incredibly dangerous situation, with wind gusts reaching 30 to 45 miles per hour, and sustained winds of 15 to 25 miles per hour, combined with dangerously low humidity. Meteorologists had gone so far as to describe the approaching conditions as historically strong winds for the region, language that isn't used casually in fire weather forecasting. When the Old Trails fire ignited directly into that setup, it didn't creep the way most grass fires do. It exploded. Within hours, it had burned nearly 3,000 acres, and Washington State Forester George Geisler told reporters at a Saturday news conference that roughly 4,000 buildings were under direct threat in its path. Then it did something that turns a bad wildfire into a genuine urban catastrophe. It crossed the Spokane River and moved directly into northwest Spokane, a populated residential section of the city itself. This is the detail that separates what happened in Spokane from a typical wildland fire story. Wildfires threatening rural homes on the edge of a forest are tragically common every summer across the American West. A fire crossing a major river and pushing directly into city blocks, into neighborhoods with sidewalks and driveways and mailboxes, is a different and much rarer kind of disaster. And it's exactly why this event is already being described by officials as one of the most destructive urban wildfires in the state's history. At the same time, the Old Trails fire was tearing toward the city. Two additional fires ignited nearby, almost certainly fed by the same extreme wind event. The Autumn Lane fire broke out near 5 Mile Falls, and the Fairview fire ignited near the town of Meade. Emergency responders were now fighting 3 separate fast-moving fires simultaneously across the same metro area, all of them being pushed by identical extreme conditions, which meant firefighting resources that would normally concentrate on a single blaze had to be split 3 ways from the very first hours of the crisis. By Sunday morning, officials had formally combined all 3 into a single incident designation, now referred to as the Spokane Area Fires, or the Spokane Complex Fire, managed jointly by local agencies, and a federal incident management team brought in specifically to coordinate the scale of the response. As of the most recent INCIWeb update, the combined complex had burned an estimated 5,390 acres, with the Old Trails fire itself accounting for roughly 3,500 of those acres, Autumn Lane around 900, and Fairview close to 981. And here is the number that tells you how serious this still is right now. As of the latest reporting, the complex remains at 0% containment. Firefighters have not yet gotten a firm line around any part of this fire. 0% containment on a fire that has already destroyed hundreds of structures and burned into a major city is about as serious a status as an active wildfire situation gets. And it's the reason officials continue to describe the danger in the present tense rather than the past tense. The human toll of that speed and scale is staggering for an American city this size. As of the most recent update from Spokane County Fire District 3, Fire Chief Cody Rohrbach confirmed that 640 structures were destroyed in the Old Trails fire alone, with officials still working to sort out exactly how many of those were homes, businesses, or other buildings, and noting that many of the destroyed homes were located inside the actual city limits of Spokane, not scattered rural properties on the outskirts. Separate reporting from the Washington State Emergency Operations Center put the broader total for the entire complex at around 700 structures destroyed. Evacuation orders have swept across the region, with figures from local officials ranging as high as 65,000 people ordered to leave their homes, and around 5,000 individual homes under some form of evacuation order at the height of the crisis. A shelter was opened at the Spokane Convention Center to take in displaced residents, many of whom arrived with nothing more than what they managed to grab on their way out the door, in some cases with only minutes of warning before the fire reached their street. Power infrastructure took a direct hit as well. Avista, the region's utility provider, reported that more than 30,000 customers lost power at the peak of the fire's advance, a number that had come down to just over 10,000 still without power as of the most recent update, as crews worked to restore service where it was safe to do so. Traffic in and around the fire zone backed up significantly as thousands of vehicles attempted to leave threatened neighborhoods at once, with thick smoke reducing visibility on some roads, even as residents tried to navigate their way to safety. Now here is the piece of news in this disaster that genuinely matters more than almost any other number, and it's worth sitting with for a moment given everything else that happened. As of the most recent official reports, there have been no confirmed deaths and no serious injuries reported from the Spokane area fires. The Spokane County Sheriff John Knowles confirmed this directly, while also being honest that officials are still working through the full scope of the disaster and that assessment could change as crews get deeper into burnt neighborhoods. A caveat officials are including specifically because search and damage assessment teams are still working through areas that were inaccessible while the fire was actively burning. 600 to 700 structures destroyed, tens of thousands of people forced to flee with almost no warning, a fire crossing a river into a city, and as of right now, 0 confirmed fatalities. That outcome did not happen by accident. It happened because evacuation orders went out fast and residents left when they were told to. Some of the accounts coming out of the burned neighborhoods are genuinely difficult to hear. Residents have described returning to their properties and stepping through hot rubble just to try to find and collect anything salvageable, family photographs, keepsakes, anything that survived the flames. One longtime Spokane homeowner, a second-generation owner of her family's house, was seen removing pieces of a statue from the wreckage of her property, explaining she wanted to get her family's heirlooms out before anyone had the chance to loot the ruins. That is the kind of loss a number like 640 structures doesn't fully capture. Behind every one of those structures is a specific family standing in the ash of what used to be their home, sorting through the remains of a life that existed there just 2 days earlier. So, how did a grass fire on the outskirts of a mid-sized city turn into this in under 24 hours? The honest answer requires understanding the broader conditions Washington state has been sitting in for months now. This fire did not ignite in a vacuum. Washington is currently in the middle of its 4th consecutive year of statewide drought, according to the governor's office. Vegetation across the eastern half of the state has been drying out for months, turning grass and brush into ready fuel that can carry fire far faster than greener, moisture-rich vegetation would allow. Governor Bob Ferguson had already declared a statewide wildfire emergency and imposed a statewide burn ban on Saturday morning, hours before the Old Trails fire even started. Specifically because forecasters were warning of historically strong winds and extremely dangerous fire weather heading into the weekend across the entire state. This wasn't a surprise disaster that caught officials off guard. Emergency planners knew Saturday was going to be dangerous, and they had already taken the step of banning all outdoor burning statewide before a single spark from this specific fire had even been reported. What they may not have fully anticipated was just how fast a single ignition, still under investigation by the Washington Department of Natural Resources as of this recording, would turn into a fire capable of crossing a river and consuming hundreds of homes within a city's limits in a matter of hours. The scale of this fire is not an isolated event either. It's the latest and most destructive entry in what officials are already calling one of the worst wildfire years in Washington's recorded history. As of the start of August, more than 1,000 separate fires had already burned approximately 425,000 acres across the state this year, the most acreage burned since 2021, according to the state's Department of Natural Resources. Commissioner of Public Lands Dave Upthegrove put it bluntly, noting that this has already been one of the busiest wildfire years on record for the state, and pointing out that, as of that statement, August, historically the driest and most dangerous month of the year for Washington wildfires, had barely even begun. More than 4,000 firefighting personnel were already deployed across the state, fighting roughly 10 large fires simultaneously, even before the Spokane complex fully formed, meaning the resources responding to Spokane are being pulled from a state firefighting system that was already stretched thin fighting fires elsewhere in Washington at the exact same time. It's also worth understanding that Spokane County is no stranger to devastating summer fires, which makes what's happening right now hit differently for people who have lived through this before. In August of 2023, the same county was struck by 2 major fires within hours of each other. The Gray Fire, ignited by sparks from a faulty utility light near Medical Lake, burned more than 10,000 acres, destroyed 240 structures, and killed 1 person. On that same day, the Oregon Fire burned across more than 10,800 acres in Spokane and Pend Oreille counties, and also claimed a life. Those fires, only 2 years ago, were treated at the time as some of the most destructive in the region's modern history. The Old Trails Fire alone has already surpassed the structure loss from the Gray Fire, and it did so within a single day which gives you a sense of just how much more explosive this event has been compared to a disaster that was already considered historic for this community not long ago. There is some cautious, meaningful context worth including here, because it matters for how this disaster is likely to be remembered. Up the Grove also said publicly that he expects this year to become something of a watershed moment for the state's approach to wildfire prevention and management, pointing to specific investments and preparation work that, in his assessment, have already made a real difference this year in protecting lives, even as property losses have been severe. That's consistent with what we're actually seeing on the ground. Hundreds of homes destroyed, but as of right now, 0 confirmed deaths in a fire that crossed a river into a city of over 200,000 people. That is not a coincidence. It's the direct result of early evacuation orders, a burn ban issued before the fire even started, and thousands of personnel already positioned and ready to respond the moment conditions turn dangerous. Compare that outcome to the Gray and Oregon fires of 2023, which together burned a smaller combined footprint than this weekend's complex has already covered, yet still resulted in 2 deaths. The difference this time appears to be speed of warning and speed of evacuation, even against a fire that grew faster and reached farther into populated areas than either of those earlier disasters did. As of Sunday, conditions were forecast to remain elevated, but somewhat less extreme than the historically dangerous winds that drove Saturday's explosive growth. The National Weather Service office in Spokane projected west winds producing gusts of roughly 15 to 20 miles per hour through the day, with gusts reaching up to 30 miles per hour in spots where wind funnels through gaps in the Cascade terrain. That's a meaningful step down from Saturday's conditions, but it is not calm weather, and with the fire complex still sitting at 0% containment, any additional wind event in the coming days remains a serious threat to further growth, particularly given how dry the surrounding vegetation already is, heading into what is typically the driest stretch of the entire year for this region. Federal attention has already turned toward the disaster as well. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson said he had personally spoken with President Trump and Department of Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin about the fires, an indication of how seriously this event is being treated at the national level given the scale of destruction inside an actual American city rather than a remote wilderness area. That kind of direct federal engagement typically signals the beginning of a process toward disaster declarations and expanded federal resources, though officials have not yet detailed exactly what additional support will follow in the coming days. For anyone in the Spokane region right now, or with family and friends there, the guidance from officials remains straightforward and urgent. If you are under a level 3 evacuation order, that means leave now. Not when it's convenient, not after you've packed everything you'd like to save. Level 3 exists specifically because officials believe there may not be time for anything less than immediate action. And the speed at which the Old Trails fire moved from a brush fire to a structure fire inside city limits is a direct illustration of why that level of urgency exists in the first place. If you're under a level 1 get ready designation, and evacuation zones have continued expanding through Sunday as the fire's behavior remains unpredictable, use this time to prepare a go bag. Identify your evacuation route in more than one direction, in case roads become blocked, and stay tuned to official Spokane Regional Emergency Communications updates rather than secondhand information circulating online, which authorities have specifically had to correct in past wildfire events when unverified reports caused confusion about which neighborhoods were actually at risk. And if your home has already been lost, officials have specifically warned residents to be cautious of scammers and looters in burned areas, which is part of why some evacuees have been returning briefly and carefully to retrieve what they can, stepping through still hot rubble rather than waiting for a formal all clear that could still be days away. This is a story that is still actively unfolding. The fire is 0% contained. The full scope of homes and businesses lost is still being assessed, and officials have made clear that number could still climb as damage assessment teams work through areas that were completely inaccessible while flames were active. And officials have been direct that, while no deaths have been confirmed, that assessment could still change as crews get further into the recovery. A note of caution, they are including deliberately rather than declaring the situation fully resolved. We will keep tracking the Spokane complex fire as containment efforts continue and as the true scale of what was lost becomes clearer in the coming days. Subscribe so you don't miss those updates, and if you're in Eastern Washington right now, please follow official evacuation guidance directly rather than relying on unverified reports. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.